going to shoot for 3 things. Bransford has written this great book. It's an online book. The reference is in the back, and it's How People Learn. I'm going to take that information, show you exactly how some of this applies in teaching learning situation. But it's just basically 3 things. And if you can do those 3 things, huge impact in the classes. Number 1 are preconceptions. People have preconceptions about how things work. And his actual principle is, if these preconceptions are not engaged, they may well fall to grasp of the, they may well fail to grasp and implement the new knowledge. What happens essentially is you just go back to the way things always have been. So if you believe something to be true and an instructor tells you something else, and you don't really engage those preconceived ideas, oftentimes you learn the new stuff, dump it for the test, have it out there, and then go right back to the way things were before. So we have to be careful to pull that information out and to work with a little bit. And so that's the first part I wanted to go through, is how do we play around with and pull that information out. Now, in this whole concept of learning, there's lots of ways of looking at this one. I just wanted to put out there very quickly this concept of the stage theory of learning. And the reason I wanted to do that is to show you how the brain actually processes information and kind of what's going on. This is an extremely simplified model. It came out in the 70s. There's some people who say that it's not all that accurate. I don't totally agree with that. I think there's a framework that works pretty well. But it's very simplified. And I'll tell you why it doesn't include lots of things after that. But let's just go through this very, very quickly. There's all kinds of stuff going around you at any given moment. Now again, trying to tie all this stuff back in the classroom. Your human mind is an amazing thing. It processes all kinds of information. When you walked into this building, in fact, when you got up and came here today, if you think about all of the stuff that your brain processed in that period of time, the cars you passed on the road, stopping for lights, pedestrians walking across campus, people walking by you, what they were wearing, what they were saying, if they were talking, conversations you had very quickly this morning, what food you ate this morning, all of this stuff that's going on at this moment in this room. There's the ceiling tiles, the walls, the floors, the place you're sitting, the people around you, just a buzz of stuff. And basically what we have to do as humans is figure out, what do we need that's important? And after we figure out what's important, that will start down the process. But if it's not important, if it's not something we process, it doesn't matter how many times you see it, it doesn't go in anywhere. So real quick, when I thought about the other day, it's the craziest thing, talking to somebody about something all of you have seen over and over and over again, but never really processed it, for most of you. And for one of those that I can come up with is your speedometer on your car. You've looked at your speedometer on your car, depends on how long you've had your car, maybe thousands of times. In a given trip across town, you glance at it all the time to see what your speed is. Okay? So you've seen it over and over and over again. The top number on that odometer, or the speedometer. Okay, think about that for just a minute. How many of you know what your top number is? How many? Just, okay. Now I'm going to ask, okay, how many of you...
Is there a probability with that?
No. Here's what I'm after. How many of you just know it? You say, I know what that number is. Raise your hand real quickly. All right, so that's you. And then how many of you don't know it? Raise your hand real quickly. Okay, that's really cool. Now, most of you by far don't know what that number is, and yet you've looked at it over and over and over again. So the point is, in this part right here, the external stimulus, it never really, it did hit the sensory memory part. We'll get that in a second. It came in, and you have glanced at it, but you never did anything with it after that. Now, odds are when you get into your car today, you'll look at it and say, holy mackerel, that's a big number. My car, I drive a Honda Accord, it's 160. Now, my car has never, to my knowledge, gone 160 miles an hour. I don't know, and I don't think it can. If any of you would like to test it, no, that's a really bad idea all the way around. Forget it. But anyway, yes, go ahead. Oh, okay.
Because visually, not the highest number. So there again, that shows you that I was not.
That's true.
Perceiving the same thing.
No, that's a really good one. In fact, yeah, go right ahead.
Are you sure it isn't kilometers per hour in that mile?
No, mine's not, because someone had gotten to a fight with me about 3 days ago about that. They said that's kilometers. I said no, the kilometers are in blue; they're underneath. These are white letters that are on top. And the other thing I need to tell you from this morning I mentioned is I got terrible ADD, so every once in a while I'm just saying, hey, let's take a minute and go do this other thing. You've just mentioned the concept of thinking of something else. If you want to send me an email, I can tell you how to do this quickly. A friend of mine did this, and I only saw it done one time. It was so cool. For the first day of class, to get across to the students that everyone's processing things differently. So take out a piece of paper, and and don't do it. We're not going to do it in here, but just tell them. Here's the thing. You can't ask me any questions. If you don't know, just do it the best you can. Ready? Okay. So take out a piece of paper. Fold it along the long way. Fold it in half. Oh, and I'm sorry. Everyone had to have their eyes closed the entire time. Everyone's eyes were closed. So he said, fold it the long way in half. Now, fold it in half again. So, okay. Some people fold it like that. Some people fold like this. And then after he did the second one, he says, okay, now rip off the upper right-hand corner. So then, you ripped off the right-hand corner. So, okay, now rip off the lower left-hand corner. Okay, ripped off the lower hand. Now, unfold it one time and fold it in the other direction. Unfold it one time, fold it in the other direction. And he had like a series of just unfold it, fold it, rip the corner off, and then he said, okay, everybody, open up your eyes and pull out the paper. And people opened up their eyes, pulled up the paper like this, and in a room of 40 people, there was 40 different looks. The papers had different parts ripped off, and it had been folded differently. And it was a quick one in terms of how you process things and how it goes through. And it was a really quick demonstration for the whole group. But in terms of that whole idea, what goes in? So here's what we have. All this information around us. Sensory memory. The things that we attend to for just a second. Those get into this very, very short memory. And if you don't do something with them, it's forgotten. Oftentimes, 2 to 5 seconds, it's gone. Somebody asks you a quick question. Which way are the restrooms? They're around the corner. Boom. It's pretty much gone at that moment. It's just forgotten. If you do process it, it goes into what's called a working memory. Now, the reason I mention this is, and I'll show you in a few seconds how this can happen, is if students are kind of half listening to you and half paying attention in class, but not processing the material, it's gone very quickly. Most of what you say in class, most of what I say today will be gone within 2 to 5 seconds. And then it's just gone. The whole clue is, can you pick up the important stuff? And so part of how people learn and how we process information is you need to help them to figure out of all of this stuff, what should get processed more. And that could be done many different ways. Students have terrible time, for instance, taking notes. You ever notice that one? Yeah. They're not good note takers. I try to help my students whenever they struggle with stuff. So I tell my students on the first day of class, especially the first level students, the intro students, there are 4 things I want you to watch for. And if you see them, take notes. Number 1 is if I repeat something, write it down. If I repeat it, write it down. Number 2, if I spell it for you, Wundt, W-U-N-D-T, good idea to write it down. If I repeat it, if I spell it. If I actually put it on the notes, if I write it down on a board, or if I have a list of 5 items up here, write those down. If I've written them down for you, write them down. By the way, I do give my PowerPoint slides ahead of time. It has very little information on them. I want them to have the framework. I don't want them to have all the notes because then they don't really have to pay attention in class. But if I come with 7 items, if you don't have them, write them down. The last one is if there's a dramatic pause. Then you write it down because I'm giving you time to write. So if I repeat it, I spell it, I write it, or if I pause, write it down. And I do that because I want to help them for processing. There's other things I can do. I catch myself doing it in workshops all the time. I can sometimes make some gestures. Oh, this is so cool. Now that's a total trying to get a person to go from sensory memory into working memory. Catching the attention, having people do demonstrations, turn to your neighbors. Anything you can do to draw their attention to something will help get that into this working memory and potentially long-term memory. David Letterman, I've learned many of my little tricks in class from him. If you watch him, if you haven't before, watch him for how he draws your attention. He'll do things like, listen to this, listen to this. It's one of his favorite phrases, listen to this. He's doing a monologue. Why in the middle of a monologue would you say, listen to this? Hopefully you listen to the whole thing. Well, because in the middle of a monologue, it's easy to turn and talk to the person next to you or to start grading some tests or doing something. And when you hear the phrase, listen to this, it draws your attention. This is really important. Here's something you'd really like. Something you can do to draw their attention. So whatever you can do to draw the attention. Otherwise, it can just be lost in a blur of activity here. Even in this working memory here, and some people call it short-term memory, working memory, it has some different names that all mean different things. There's arguments that it lasts like 20, 30 seconds. There's other arguments that it can last a couple of days. I've got a couple of things to show you. I differentiate that which can be remembered for 24 hours, and I put that mostly into a general category like this, and then beyond the 24 hours. After about 24 hours, you lose, forget almost everything that you've seen, which is good. If you think about it, you don't need to keep track of all that stuff. When you stop and go to order something for lunch and you look up at the board and you're staring at the board, I don't know what to eat today. All right, I'm on a diet, I'll have the bacon ranch club sandwich. If you pick out the thing, it's my diet. I haven't lost any weight, but I'm on a diet. Okay, so I picked that up. An hour later, but certainly the next day, there is no reason for me to remember everything that I've looked up on that board. I may have been able to keep track of it for even a couple of minutes, maybe 20 minutes, but then it should go away. So it kind of goes. If you repeat something over and over again, it can stay in there a little longer, but rote memory won't get it into long-term memory either, and I'll show you that in a second too. But if we do that, code it, we can get it into long-term memory. Long-term memory lasts an indefinite amount of time. We don't even know what the limit is on this one because there are people who are very, very elderly individuals who can't reliably remember things from their childhood. That means memories can be there 50, 60, 70 years. Other memories are not in there. There's a question, though, of whether you can retrieve them. So what we're going to talk about today, and I tried to do this all in about 10 minutes, so again, spending something I'd spend weeks on class, do it in about 10 minutes, is we want to get stuff into long-term memory and then get it so that it can come back out. Because if you can't get it out of long-term memory, it is of no real value to you. Kind of like a library out here, if you take away, I'm an older person here, if you take away the card catalogs, if we take away the organizational system, shake the library a little bit so the books get mixed up a bit, it doesn't matter that they're here if you can't get to them. So being able to pull the material out, really good evidence that the best way of getting stuff out of long-term memory is to practice pulling it out of long-term memory. So we'll hit some of that too. So, in your class, you need to get the information to the students in a way that they can understand it, then help them to focus on it enough that they can then process it. Once they process it, they get it into their long-term memory. Once it's in that long-term memory, have them practice it getting it back out. If you can do that, life is easy. Now there's some problems. This is D. Fink, and D. Fink wrote this book on creating significant learning experiences, and I bring it up for a quick reason. It's a good book. It's a 2003 book. It's a good book because he's saying if all of these things come into play, and I think there's more too, quite frankly, but at least all of these things come into play, and they're different components of actually significant learning, of learning. Foundational knowledge, that stuff where you learn something, is just one piece of it. And I guess what I wanted to just point out quickly is that we have to be careful that we don't forget the rest of the stuff. So for instance, learning how to learn is an important component of learning is learning how to learn. In fact, there's some great old psych experiments. And I did some of these when I was in graduate school too. If you have a motivated person, first of all, they have to be motivated. But if they're motivated, and then you want to pay them for their responses. So for half of you're all motivated to learn something, you want to learn this stuff. For half of you, I say, I will give you $10 for every right answer. And for you folks, you don't know about the $10. I'd say just do the best you can. There's no significant difference between the two groups. There is a significant difference if I teach you guys how to learn. Here's a way to process the material that can actually help you to retrieve it. And for you guys, just work really hard at it. And what we find is that knowing how to learn really helps. So there's just that little chunk in there, that learning how to learn. So teaching your students how to learn is something that's really important. Although, I've done it myself. I fell into many years of walking into the classroom just assuming they made it through high school, they got into a pretty good school, they must know how to learn. Be real careful with that. Caring, creating that human dimension component. If students believe whether you care for them or not, because perception is just as important as reality, it makes a big difference. I've actually had students who have skipped other classes so that they could study extra for my class, which is pretty cool. I've had them skip my class before to write papers for other classes because they didn't want to disappoint the other instructor. I mean, there's a huge component in there about caring in the classroom, and it is a big thing. This whole human dimension, we're all humans. And because we have all kinds of stuff that comes into it, there's lots of stuff going on there. I throw the affective component into there. mean, if something tragic's happened in a family and the student sitting in the classroom, they're not going to be processing anything. Class of 200 one time, I had a student come in. I just happened to notice him. He came in and he looked really lethargic and he sat down. Class was just about ready to start. I ran up and I happened to know his name. Out of 200, I tried to learn about 30 to 40 names at least, and I happened to know his. And I went up and I said, John, what's going on? You look a little disheveled. And he said, well, my dad went in for a checkup. They found out he has a tumor in his brain, and they're like going to operate on him tomorrow morning. Just found this out. I said, for crying out loud, go home. He said, well, my mom's going to come over, or not the mom, but somebody's going to come over and pick me up. I don't have a car. And he says, I have nothing I can do for the next 4 hours. And he says, all things being equal, I'd just soon be here. This was a student in a mass lecture that thought that's where he'd rather be because he felt, it felt more regular to him. But there is no way, and I told him, I said, you're not going to process anything today. That's okay. Hang out as long as you want and leave whenever you feel you need to. And he was there about half the time and he left. But all kinds of things going on. By the way, you have to be really careful. A student called me a few years ago and said, can I take a makeup exam? This is the night before the test, about 6 o'clock before the test. And I said, well, so what's going on? She said, well, my cat just died, and I don't really think I can take the test tomorrow. Now, I have to admit, some of you are cat lovers. You get it just like that. I'm barely a cat liker. And it is true. Cats will gravitate toward the person in the room that likes them the least. I can't tell if they want to win you over or if they just want to irritate the crap out of you. Whichever, I think if they're cats, they want to irritate you. But so I caught something in her voice and I said, could you tell me real quickly, are you okay? And I worded it like that. She said, yeah, I'm going to be okay. I said, well, obviously you've had this cat for a long time. And she's a first-year college student. She said, we've had it my whole life. Cats will live to be that long. She went to college. She took her cat with her. Her whole life she's had this cat, and it just died. It was a member of the family. I said, well, do you have anyone you can call? And I tried to lighten the mood a little bit because I do a lot of humor. And I said, do you have anybody you can call? She says, well, my mom's out doing such and such. My dad isn't really a cat person. And I could call my sister. We talk about everything, but she's no help at all. She irritates me. I said, okay, well, if you need to chat with me, you can. Maybe you want to go to the counseling center. I said, but certainly you can take a makeup on the test. If your sister passes away, however, you take it on time. She says, that's a deal, sir. So her sister had obviously irritated her a lot. But a lot of stuff is going on in the classroom. So the point is, again, I like to bring these up because as you walk into the classroom, if you keep track of the fact that they're individuals, there's really easy to fall into an out-group bias kind of thing where we say, oh, you know what students are like. I do a workshop on millennial students. I said, oh, millennial students, yeah, they drive me nuts. You know what you've just done is taken the entire group of students, dropped them in a category of millennial students, and treated them all as if they're the same. So in the classroom, we have to be really careful about this. Then there's little issues of integration. How do we integrate the material? How do we apply it? One of my favorite ones is hearing people say, whew, I thought my students really understood the material. Then they took a test, and they bombed it. The whole class bombed it. And I'll say, so tell me about the test. What was on the test? Say, well, there's some basic information and some application kinds of things. I can usually have to tease that one out. But if they're application questions, knowing material doesn't mean that you can apply it. They're different domains. So what people will do is they'll make statements like, I thought my students knew it, but they can't apply any of it. Say, well, yeah, that can happen. When you say you thought they knew it, they probably do. They may very well know it. If you want to know if they know it, test them for knowledge. If you want to know if they can apply it, test them for application. But don't teach knowledge and then test application. Big problem. So just be careful with that. So for example, I do it in my stats class all the time. First day of stats class. I say, listen, you may not believe this, but people who collect numbers, they collect data, are very important for all of us. Can you think right now and jot down on a piece of paper everything you can think of in the next minute about how people who collect numbers impact your life on a daily basis? And for you folks could probably make a long list. For my students, they stare at me for the longest time. And they look down. Well, there's the census takers. A couple others. What are some other ones? What's some good? You guys got a couple good ones? Taxes. Taxes would be good. Hospital data. Sports. Oh, that's good. Sports stuff. All right, here's... Banking is good. Okay, then what I do is I tell them, you know what I find intriguing? The human brain and how we interact with the world. Gustav Fechner wrote some stuff back in 1860 about how we take representations of our mind and quantify them. For instance, how bright these lights should be. If they're too bright, it would be blinding, but if they're too dim, it wouldn't help us. How tall should that chair be? How tall should the desk be? How wide should the chair be? How wide should that door be? How fast should the elevator door open and how fast should they close? Where should the sensors be in case somebody sticks their arm in there? Books. How big should a book actually be? Because if it's too big, you can't carry it around. If it's too small, you can't see it. People who collect data do a lot of stuff, don't they? And then I pause for a minute and say, now write down anything you can think of that as a data collector may have had an impact on your life. And all of a sudden, they'll write like 90 miles an hour. All I've done is give them an example. So that's that part of just giving application examples. So that's what we're after. Now, I doing the same thing as I did before. I got to be careful of the time because we don't have a whole lot here. I want to do the first part is kind of lecturing, and then I have some active stuff for us to do. Learning styles. I want to be very careful with learning styles here, and I'm not going to ask you what your learning styles are. Here's the deal. A few years ago, psychology came up with this concept of they would take a team of roughly 4 people and have them investigate something that's a really big issue, but really investigate it well. And these are like 4 of the biggest names in psychology right now doing research. Bob Bork is doing tons of really good stuff. Passler's doing some, they're publishing all over the place. The question essentially was learning styles, right? Now, 2 or 3 years ago, you could have come to a workshop or I could have helped you with how I designed my class to help with learning styles. Read this. Turns out that there's only about 3 or 4 studies that have ever been done collecting any data on learning styles. And that concept of meshing, teaching to a student's learning style, we all know how great that is. There's no data on it, except for those couple of studies. And the studies, they found out there was no impact. It doesn't help to teach to someone's learning style, mostly because it appears that people don't actually have learning styles. What it appears is that they have learning preferences. Learning preferences come from a lifetime of experiences. But a style would mean I learn this way, but not this way. So if a student tells you they're an auditory learner, it means they really need to learn auditorily, but they can't really learn visually, kinesthetically, in the other areas. Or that they somehow do way better when it's presented this way than when it's presented the other way, in a controlled way, and then they have to be better at this than someone who's a kinesthetic learner who's having auditory material. And when you really test this out, it doesn't work anymore. Here's what's really neat about this one, is it does work if it makes sense. So for example, if you're teaching someone to play the clarinet, you could show them photographs of the clarinet, let them listen to symphonies of clarinets. You could let them study books about clarinets. They could learn the music, learn all the fingerings. They could do all of that stuff and never touch a clarinet. Then you hand them the clarinet and say, okay, the concert's tomorrow, go play. Obviously, they couldn't do it. You have to be a kinesthetic learner when it's a kinesthetic activity. Riding a bike requires you to ride the bike. However, if you're learning how to write a report, and there's blocks where you lay out where's the topic sentence go, and then where does the major issue goes, and where's the conclusion, and I'm moving things around, and I'm saying, this is fabulous because I'm a kinesthetic learner, and I move it all around. That actually doesn't help me learn it any better than other ways of teaching. The other thing is we have to be careful we've left some out. This is a nasal learner struggling with an odorless textbook. This report indicates, by the way, I believe if you read this sometime, that 70% of students would rather smell a term paper than write one. And here's my favorite. My child is not stupid, Weber said. There's simply no way for him to thrive in a school that only caters to traditional students who absorb educational concepts by hearing, reading, seeing, discussing, drawing, building, or acting out. That's no way. My 15-year-old Chloe couldn't sustain her interest in academics, and as a result, she would goof off with her friends and get in trouble. Now I realize all those D's and F's did not represent a failure on my daughter's part, but rather her school's failure to provide an appropriate nasal-based curriculum. That's the issue that we get into, is that if we, and this is the one I get really concerned about, learning styles makes tons of sense. And now I'm bringing this up in this whole workshop here because it's preconceived ideas, getting those out, looking at those, playing around with them a little bit. But we have to be careful in terms of what we're doing in teaching students. It makes a lot of sense to say, I tend to do better with visual material. I'm a visual learner. But that's a little bit like somebody saying, you know, I tend to get sad at times. I'm manic depressive. And we would be really nervous about people who self-diagnose that way. Or look at this spot I have on my skin. I think I have a melanoma and I better get checked out. Or this is probably indicative of some liver problem that I have. We get nervous about people self-diagnosing medical stuff, self-diagnosing psychological stuff, but we're fine with students rolling in and saying, I'm a visual learner. My response now is, good for you, so are the rest of your classmates. We're all visual learners. I mean, when you look around, you learn that way. So a picture of graph is very, very important. The tricky spot is, be careful that we're not letting our students disengage from the learning process because you're not teaching in a way in which they can learn. That's the danger. If the students say, I can't really learn from that person because I'm a visual learner and they don't do any graphs, they're disengaging from the whole thing. So that's the danger we have to be careful of. So, which is something to watch out for. Now, real quickly, the other part I want to do on this one is the concept of how we process information. Mueller and Dweck did a great little study. And here's how the study worked. You solve anagrams. In solving these anagrams, and this is going to be the thing on the bottom of page 3 that's got the dotted line across it. Here's how the study rolls. First of all, we break you into 3 groups. For group number 1, everybody gets these anagrams. I should slow down and tell you this. So you take these and mix them up and come up with new words. So mug would become gum. See, like that. Night becomes thing. Very good. We don't want anybody to get hurt. These are the answers. So we get the anagrams. When you're done doing the anagrams, we tell you either good for you, you must be smart, or good for you, you must have worked really hard. So you get the feedback, the either just well done, general feedback, worked hard, or you're smart. Those are the 3 conditions. Then we come back with another list. This list is hard for everybody. So everybody does really, really terrible on this one. These are just a couple of examples here. I like teaching is cheating. That's pretty cool. Then after you do this one, we basically say ouch, ouch, and ouch. You know, this is really rough. All we want to know now is we want you to experience failure. And then what we're really after is coming back for a 3rd one. After you've been successful, and I said, here's your feedback, then you've failed. Now, how hard do you work the next time? Now we're looking at some self-efficacy issues and some other stuff. How hard do you work on getting these? There are 3 groups again. The group that was the good for you, just the plain old good for you group, they look like this. Now what I'd like you to do is take that graph of yours and just draw a line in where you think the effort-based feedback group would be and where you think that the work hard group would be. So just draw a line in here somewhere for effort and a line in here somewhere for smart. That's it, sorry. Smart and effort. All right, for sake of timing, let's just keep moving here then. So, did they look pretty similar? Did you come up with differences then, different ways of these? Here's the one I like to do, and I do this with my classes all the time. Give some data or some expectation or some the setup for some finding, and then have them compare. This is that whole part that Bransford was talking about, getting preconceived ideas out. Here's the problem. If you just give the results, here's the study, here's the results, here's the structure, and here's the findings, whatever, most people tend to say, yeah, it's about what I would thought. Almost everybody assumes that whatever pops up there is about what they would have figured. They also look around the room and figure we all know this stuff, and I'll tell you from teaching intro psych, the number of times that people say, this is all common sense. And when it's all common sense, it doesn't make sense that we spend a lot of time. Just tell us what you want to learn and we'll learn it. Then I started playing with a little game where I would hand out something to say, here's a description of your personality. I have a little test you take. You turn in the test. The next day I give you a little personality description. Then I ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how well does this fit you? You tend to be outgoing at times, although at other times you're more reserved. You feel very intelligent, but there are times when you also feel a little bit out of place. You don't know if you really fit in well, but you've got some really good friends, but you're curious about how well some of your friends would come to your aid if you really needed them. You all know where I'm going with this. Everybody had exactly the same feedback. On a scale of 1 to 10, they all give it like 7s, 8s, and 9s. Have you heard that the horoscopes change signs now?
Yeah,
We found this new calendar or whatever happened. I got to read more about this. My daughter just told me the other day she's distraught because she's not the same sign that she used to be. I can't remember if she went from Libra to Virgo or something, but in her head it makes more sense. But she'd always believed it was right. So if there was ever a time when people should be dissuaded from believing in these astrological signs, it's to find out you've been living for 40 years under the wrong sign, and their immediate response is, this makes so much more sense. So we have to be careful with these things. So by comparing these with others, what happens is, not only do you not look up there and say, yeah, that's about what I would have done, but you also can go to the neighbor and say, whoa, why did you do that? So it started some great conversations real quickly. So here's what it ended up being. Effort goes there. People who did poorly after the first one, who were told, you must have worked hard and then you failed, will work significantly harder the next time. The people who are told you must be smart, the second time represents the fact that they can't do it. And they actually work less hard. I saw one that was dead on. I like that. And the issue here is, if I don't possess this thing, why should I put energy into it? If you could do me a favor as my colleagues, we're all teaching colleagues here, please start calling people when they start calling on them, or calling them out, I guess, when they say, oh, I don't do math. We can't just laugh and say, yeah, I'm not good at it either. Essentially, I don't do math means I don't possess the entity that would allow me to be successful in mathematics. And if that's true, then you could set it aside. But if it's not true, maybe you haven't put the energy in necessary to do well, which would be the effort part. The effort part means it's incremental. I work and work and work and get better at it. This means I got it or I don't. We in the United States, tend to teach our kids kind of smartness-based stuff. Is you're bright or you're not bright. Other cultures tend to do it another way. Yes?
Is there a difference in variation of the two groups?
In variation in terms of
the
the variability within group variability?
standard deviation, that's the mean, right?
Yeah, these are the means. I have to go back and look, but it's a real clear differentiation, significant, but I don't know what the variability is. I have to go back and look. Or you can pull it. I mean, this is Mueller and Dweck. So yeah, but it's interesting, and this has been demonstrated in other areas over and over and over again, the concept of an entity-based curriculum or entity-based idea or an incremental-based. And here's what makes it really rough. For some of you in this room, you do pick up things faster than others for a host of reasons. It may be that starting out very, very young, you were reinforced for lots of mathematical things you're done, and now you tend to pick up math very quickly. Those can happen. Drawing. You may have drawn a lot as a child, and now you draw pretty well. But it's really rare, and I know that they put them in the news all the time, it's really rare to have somebody who picks up a pen and pencil for the first time and starts to draw seriously and draws a masterpiece. Doesn't really happen. Mathematics. People don't all of a sudden just spew out great mathematical concepts. So it comes from lots of effort and lots of work. However, some people do, for a host of reasons, pull together things better than others. I have one daughter who's got an amazing, she picks up pitch so well. Dad, I don't know that she's ever been trained in that area. She just does that well. However, she picks up the pitch very quickly. She sings in the choir. The choir teacher keeps saying, oh, you're a natural, you're a natural. And I kept saying, stop doing that. Don't tell her she's a natural. Tell her she's working really hard. She's got some good basic foundations, but working hard at it, because the way I finally got her to stop, by the way, the choir teacher, I said, that's great. Mary's not going to be coming to class anymore. And she said, why not? I said, well, she doesn't have time to waste it on your class. This was such a great conversation. Teacher said, but what? I said, well, you're not teaching her anything. I'd really rather have her focus in areas where she's learning. She said, but she's learning so much in here. I said, no, I've talked to you many times. I keep telling you she's working hard at your class. You keep telling her that she's a natural. If she's a natural, she doesn't have to work at it. Why would she come to class? I think we're just going to go get a recording deal. And she paused. She said, well, she's not ready for that. And I said, will she be if she works hard at it? She says, all right, you win. She finally gave. But this concept she kept throwing out there. So we have to be really careful how we do this. And so, but the demonstration I showed you in turning to your neighbors, that's the preconceived ideas, getting that information out. And that's the incremental stuff there. And you can go online, actually, and Carol Dweck explains the whole thing. Yes? Now, we got one generation. I think if we flush them, then we'll be okay again. No, you got to do that once in a while. I have to, one of my favorite old jokes was the real reason that psychologists have kids is you don't have to deal with IRB committees. No, the nice thing we have is the way the human brain just kind of works, and kind of like that horoscope thing where it's like, oh, good, now I can, this really works well for my life now, is that they can still be taught, but we are raising a generation that we're telling a couple of things to. Number one is that you're a winner no matter what. And I got to tell you, just as a quick side note, and see some people immediately freeze when I say this, but I also say, please watch context. But I looked at my daughter one time and I said, how's it feel to be a loser? And that will make most people cringe if I'm not careful. To think that I would look at my kid and say, how does it feel to be a loser? I think that's important once in a while. And the one time I did it, I'm just going to tell you quickly here, she signed up for a race at school. She was in 3rd grade. She signed up for it. Every day after school, I'd say, come on, let's go run. Let's go practice running. Let's go practice the starts. Let's practice coming out of the blocks. Let's practice. Nah, I'm busy. I don't want to do it. Day of the race came. On the day of the race, she came in last place. She was, as far as I could tell, the only kid who did absolutely nothing to prepare for this. And maybe the others didn't do much, but she had no natural proclivities in Syria. So she finished the race, and I said, honey, I love you, but I'm just curious. How does it feel like right now to be a loser? She said, I hate it. And I said, do you hate it enough to work hard at being a not loser? She said, yes. I said, does it be okay if we sign up for this race next year and we come back and kick those butts of those other kids? She says, yeah, Daddy, I want to do that. I felt good about that moment. Then the trophies were given out. You guys know how this gig goes. 1st place, 2nd place, 3rd place, 4th place. There's 8 kids. 5th place, 6th place, tries really hard, and most motivated or most interested or something like it. Most willing to show up was the trophy. She came back from the trophy thing just beaming from ear to ear. She says, hey, I got a trophy. I said, well, that's congratulations. I said, I actually have never won a trophy in my life. She says, well, I got one now. Can we put it on the fireplace? I said, yep. Now, when do you want to get practicing for next year? She said, what are you talking about? Look, I got a trophy. Her whole mentality changed to she was a winner, which meant she didn't have to work at it. So I bring that up because we have changed that mentality. So that is changing, but that's one that we have. The other one we do have is this whole concept of it's you have it or you don't. And yes, I mean, the answer is you certainly can still change that. You have to demonstrate what hard work can do, basically get them to do the work and then see the outcomes. But it's really tricky to do that when other people are telling them you're naturals. And we were talking about mathematics earlier and like class where students have a really hard time with math. Getting them to believe they can do it is the first huge hurdle that you have.
But it does work.
So, and it does work. Oh, good. That's good. Yeah, anyway, it's getting them to actually doing it is really, really important. Okay, here's another one I wanted to just try here real quick. I do this exercise every day, every semester on the first day of class. So I want to try it real fast here. Everybody get a penny here. Don't look at anybody else's when they're doing this. All by yourself. If the task is a simple one, just pick out the real U.S. penny. Don't iPhone it. Don't Google it. Don't pull a penny out. Just look at this and just pick a penny. If you decide you do want to do this in your class, let me know, and I'll actually I'll send you the PDF of the penny. Good. Again, working alone, all by yourselves. Now, either circle the letter under the penny or write the letter somewhere. You got to commit to one coin. So now I'm going to ask you real quickly to raise your hand on which coin. Please don't look around the room and think, "Ooh, I wonder if anybody else picked this coin." That's just sad. Just be proud and pick your coin. Okay? Now I want to show you real quickly something of the way the brain works here. All right, ready? On your mark, it's that. How many A's? Any A's? Got some A's. Good. B's. B's. C's. C's. D's. Very good. E's. Excellent. F's. Very, very good. G's. Excellent. H's. I's. That's I's. Good. J's. Very good. K's. L's. Any L's? Good. M's. N's. Any N's? Or O's? All right, not bad. That's 8 different coins. There's about 30 people here who just picked 8 different coins of something you've looked at thousands of times. Don't look at a penny yet. Hurry, put that away. No, don't look at it. You can do it. Put it down. Okay. Next thing real fast, and we're going to try to do this. I don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to try this next step. In about groups of about 4 or 5, see if you come to a consensus on which coin you would pick in some small groups. Anybody in here find out that their colleagues were not as smart as they are? Usually you get into groups and you're thinking, how in the world can you be picking J? So but you keep that to yourself. Okay, here we go. Let's see how many any groups come up with. We'll run through them real quick. Groups. Holy mackerel. Well, that's a lot faster then. So all except for you guys. What did you come up with?
She's the one that looked.
Oh, that's right. You looked at the penny.
We all agreed it was I.
That's true.
We said we're not sure if the 1 cent's on that side. So if it's not I, then it's A.
Got it. That's pretty good. Now, here's what's really important, and this is a really big thing. A is the right answer. I noticed the one person in your group that was so quick to come to consensus left. See, he convinced, they all picked I's anyway. Okay, so here's what's really important though. How many of you had I like the very first time on your own? Just raise your hands quickly. I'm sorry, A. So we ended up with like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's like 6 people, 7 people in the room who had A, and yet after literally 3 or 4 minutes of talking, the rest of you said, okay, by whatever measure you came to an agreement that A was the answer. When I talk to my students about the value of doing group work and really talking to the colleagues, this makes a great demonstration for that. It was a couple of minutes and a lot of learning that happens. And so the point there is that can be very, very valuable. It's also a great icebreaker that ties in with the course material. There's also some research out there which indicates, and I think you could probably confirm it for yourselves, icebreakers don't tend to be a real favored activity when they have nothing to do with the material that you're actually breaking into. And so to have people do something that's not related at all is one that you have to be careful of. There's so many icebreakers out there that can tie into the material, break the ice while you're breaking the material down a little bit too. There's a great statement out there, I've heard it over and over again. People say, I don't spend a lot of times with details in my class. I want to do critical thinking. The problem is, if you don't teach them some details, they have nothing to critically think about. And what you have to be really careful with, and the penny one kind of demonstrates that too, is if they don't have some knowledge there to kind of build from, that whole scaffolding thing, everything else, how do you build on stuff? So you have to get them the knowledge. The other statement that I have a really hard time with is people forget about how do you discount your own knowledge when you give that advice? So the point here is, for instance, classical conditioning. I can do this fairly easily. I teach classical conditioning over and over and over again. I have many, many years now. When I teach it, I could say, don't worry about what an unconditioned stimulus, conditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, and conditioned response. Don't worry about those. You can look those up. Let's just think about the essence of classical conditioning. I'm using this as an example because it should work well to confuse most of you. If we did that, if I said, just look those up, let's just talk critically about classical conditioning. So for instance, if you go into your grandmother's house and it smells like baked goods, and every time you go there you have fun and you relax, and no matter how stressful life is, it just feels good. Later in life, you could go into a house that's for sale and walk in and smell baked goods, and suddenly you're not stressed anymore, see? And that's because, and all of a sudden, I'm getting that because of the classical conditioning stuff, but you'd sit back and say, okay, but I don't understand what's going on here. The real truth of it is that most of us are born with very few things that we do automatically, but there are some things which is there's an unconditioned stimulus and a conditioned stimulus. An unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response. The unconditioned stimulus is something that triggers a response in you, like a loud noise could cause you to jump. Unconditioned stimulus, loud noise, jumping is the conditioned stimulus. Now when you pair an unconditioned stimulus with a conditioned stimulus, the conditioned stimulus was previously neutral, will become to elicit a response upon multiple pairings, so that you can actually get a conditioned response which will become close to an unconditioned response, although not exactly the same. Think of that grandma example. Got it? Yeah, okay, great. Dr. Z, you're a genius and I don't know nothing. That's the type of thing you're all of a sudden doing. So when you say to the students, don't worry about this, you can look that stuff up, be careful, because if it's a foundational piece of knowledge you have, you might not realize how important it is. So figure out what do you really have to know in the class, teach that, the deep foundational knowledge, and then they can build later. But I get real nervous when people say, when I hear them say, oh, don't worry about that, you can just look that up. Also the retrieving. Retrieving information is very important. Now, as students are learning and going through things, and I'm sorry, I got like 8 minutes left here, so we'll finish up this last piece here. We have to be careful because it's easy to think that you understand something and you're getting it when you're actually not. So something like this, which is on the sheet, last Cerny, Flingeldob, and Pribben were in the Birdlink, Trupper, and Gloopy cables, and Gleamy Burley Grep. Suddenly Diddy Strutzel moved into Flingeldob Trusk. Pribben Glape, to Flingeldob, they chife that Diddy Strutzel is Trezel, is tuning in your grep. Okay. Here's what's neat, and your students can do this. You looking at your sheets, we'll just do this as a group. Let's do a little quiz. Don't answer real fast, just wait a second. But wait, wait. So when did Flingeldob and Pribben treppen? Well, just answer as a group here. When did Flingeldob and Pribben treppen? When was it? Last Cerny. Very, very good. What kind of capels did Flingeldob and Pribben treppen? Ready? Wait a minute. Okay, what kind of capels were they? Gloopy. Very good. What did the Diddy Strezel do to Flingeldob's Tress? Now wait a second. What did the Diddy Strezel do? Okay, ready? Okay, as a group, what did he do? Boofed, right. Boofed suddenly. Well, I would fill in the blank. I'd take boofed or boofed into. Number 4, what was Pribben's reaction at that point? At that point, Pribben did what? Glaped. Very good. Now, what's basically happening here is you're answering the questions, and everything is going fine. And then we get to question 5. What do you imagine happened next? Let's see. The Diddy Strezel is tuning in your grep. Now what? All right. If it were me taking the quiz, I'd say, I'm going to go on to the next question. I'll come back. Based on the incidents in the story, why do you think Flingeldob and Pribben went to the Birdlink? Are they likely to return? Why or why not? Now, here's where it becomes really tricky. If I gave you 10 points apiece for your quiz and you had memorized that, you would have gotten 1 through 4, just nailed those points there. And then suppose I didn't use a grading rubric. Bad on my part, but I don't like them, so I'm not going to use them. See, I'm just tongue-in-cheek. I would always use them. If I gave you a couple points for 5 and 3 points for 6 because you wrote a lot of stuff, you'd get 40 plus 2 plus 3, that's 45. 45 out of 60. 45 out of 60 is a 75%. On my class, 75% would get you a C. And of course, that would prompt some of you to come to my office, one of my favorites. Hey, Dr. Z, I got a C on my test, and I don't get C's. Ever hear that one? The things, I would love sometime to have a conversation about the things you can't say to students. Because this one would be, you do now, but you can't do that. Instead, what we have to do is we have to say, I used to say, well, classes up until this point were probably lower level classes, and you could, you probably did well because you powered through them, and this is a really tricky class. So a C represents a good foundation knowledge. You just have to work harder. You see, that's wrong if you've memorized stuff you don't really get. So now what I'm talking about, and this is under that framework of developing competence, a person has to have a deep understanding. Now what I ask my students when they come in for this is I say, first of all, I ask them how long they studied, how do they study, how are things going in life. I ask a couple of those questions, and I say, so what do you think about the material? And it's my favorite thing to do now. The number of students will say, what do you mean? I'll say, well, what do you think about it? I'll say, well, I don't know what you mean, what do I think about it? And we play that game for just a little time, and that's usually the ones who don't get it. And then they'll say, well, I'll tell you the truth, I don't really understand it. I'll say, well, you must be working really hard in this class then. Say, well, I am. I've read the chapter like 4 times. I make up flashcards. I say, yeah, I can tell you're working really hard because if you don't understand it and you're getting a C, you're really doing well on that portion of the test. What you're not doing well on are these things where you have to understand the material. So I don't need to understand this material to answer Bloom's low-level kinds of questions. So just making sure you see if they're getting it or not. It's a really, really important thing to do. And that's it, just getting down to the foundation of really understanding the material. Oftentimes, this can come out in homework problems, by the way. Great studies out there. A person teaching calculus said he used to give his students 5 problems all the time. He switched. Now he gives them 4 problems, and on the 5th one, he says, tell me what you think about this. In a math course, tell me what you think about these. When I do variability, It's kind of like I might mess with the range, I might mess with the sample size to calculate a variability, and what I'm trying to get the students to kind of understand is that if you have a smaller sample size versus a bigger sample size, the numbers are really spread out versus not spread out. I want them to get that. What my students used to do is they'd plow through the formula after they did one or two. They'd say, oh, I know how to do those, now I'm moving on. And that's the tricky spot. I'm moving on because I got it down enough. And that's when you say, okay, look at the 4 problems. What was I going for here? What was I really trying to teach you? And seeing if they can get that. It really makes a big difference. So, by the way, I do realize I made one other tiny mistake on that coin one. Got excited to get to this other one here. Started talking about that. On this coin one, I also forgot to tell you, I like to do this in the first day of class because you know why this was difficult? Why'd you have trouble picking out the right coin? It's the same thing as the Flingeldoben-Pribben kind of thing, is processing information.
People don't look
Right. There's too many choices. They don't look at often. But if I had a handful of change and I threw it out in the room and they said, this is all U.S. coins, how many pennies? You could glance over and say 3. You would know immediately. What do you need to know that something's a penny? Color and size. If it's this big in copper color, that's all you need. So what happens, kind of like the Flingeldoben-Pribben, if you've read it a little bit and you think you've got it, you move on, you say, I've got it, good enough. Color and size. I do this on the first day of class and say, you know what? If I did this in a coin collecting conference, people could pick off those coins easily. Here, you know it's copper and this big, that's enough. In this class, copper and this big, not good enough. On the test, you have to know details. And so what happens here is experts know the details. You're going to become experts. You have to pay attention to details. And I tell people that because once you have enough information, copper and this big, your brain should move on. Think about that in terms of how to get to a certain store. If I tell you how to get to Walmart from here, and I give you the big landmarks, that's all you need. That's all you want. If I start telling you how many trees there are, how many side streets, a lot of details, you say, that's details. I don't need those details. So it's the receiver who decides that's enough details. So what you have to do is explain to the students, you need to know details in here. So once you do that, and it's 1:24, so we're like out of just about time. I'm going to explain one last study, pretty much done. This study is one of my new favorites, Karpik and Roediger. This is a whole series of stuff called desirable difficulties. There's undesirable difficulties in learning. There's also desirable things. Sometimes making it harder actually increases learning. This one is done this way. It's a study where you have 4 test periods, or study periods. You read through material, and you got 5 minutes to read through a passage of material. Then, a few minutes later, you read through it again, and then again. So you've read through the passage 4 times, and then you take a quiz over the material. That's this one. Sorry, and I messed up here. It's, whoops. If I go ahead, it's going to show you what the data is. This is like 83%. This runs down to, I believe, 40%. I'll show you the graph on the next one. But I forgot to include those. Apologize. Runs about 40 to 80. 80% after 4 trials. This group, they go through 3 study trials, then they take a quiz over the material, do not get feedback on the quiz, then they take a quick test over the material, the same as these people. So they've only studied 3 times, and they scored a little less. I think that's 78. This group actually studies the material only 1 time, then takes a quiz, no feedback, takes a quiz, no feedback, and takes a quiz. And then they take the 5-minute later test. They tend to score the worst of the 3. Here's what's really cool about this. Come back a week later. The group that did all studies has lost most of what they learned. I think that's a 2-to-1 factor. It goes from like 83% down to 40%. The group that took 1 practice test and then took the quiz 5 minutes later and now is taken a week later has gone down that far. And the most amazing thing was the one that did almost all tests had almost no decrement at all. Huge differences here. At least these 2 are huge differences. Now, what's happening here is they're practicing at retrieval. The argument is if you want people to learn things, they have to practice pulling them back out. We know about the physiology of this too. It's called long-term potentiation. When you start to fire neuronal pathways, they fire more easily. Who was the first president of the United States? Bam. That pathway has fired so many times for you, it just fires. So the point here is get them to practice at retrieving. The reason you want to do this is that students can study, and still not be able to produce it for an exam. And I'll have students who will come by and say, I read the chapter like 4 times. I'll say, well, did you quiz like a roommate? Did you guys quiz back and forth? Did you make up flashcards and go through them? Did you do some way of pulling that out? Well, no, I just kept reading it. Well, reading isn't not going to pull it back out. And those are the actual numbers. The study went from 83 to 43. The study test went from 71 to 61. I'm sorry, it was down to 43 was the percent forgetting. 83 to 40. This went 71 to 61. I mean, just huge differences. Well, if you can get them to read it 4 times, that's good. But the big thing is getting them to just pull the material back out. And that was just about all, except for the last piece, which doesn't really require a whole lot here, is just metacognition. And all I want to say on metacognition, because we're out of time here, is getting students to think about their learning. This can be done in lots and lots of different ways. And so all I'm going to tell you is your homework assignment, and you can call Jed because he's got this book on his shelf, I'm sure of it, is Angelo and Cross, Classroom Assessment Techniques. He's nodding because I knew he had one. Oh, excellent. Oh, they are? Part of it. Okay, part of it's on the website. That's even better. Classroom Assessment Techniques, CATS. CATS and Classroom Assessment Techniques. Classroom Assessment Techniques is what you're after. Or check with Jed and he'll tell you. Here's the deal. These are quick things you do during class that gets the students to reproduce or to produce answers or to stuff. So it could be like a 1-sentence summary. In 1 sentence, write what we learned today. If they can't do it right then, they're not going to magically know it later. When they turn that in, you only have to read 1 sentence per student, so that was pretty cool. If they practice that, after you read a chunk of the material, write out in a sentence or 2 what you just read. There's things in the class called a 1-minute paper. Write for 1 minute. There's list 3 things, whatever it is. But teach your students that as they're learning material to practice pulling it out. Remember the old SQ4R, SQ3R method? It was like the study, what is it, SQ? Study, question, read, recite, reflect. The whole concept based on step 2 was to question yourself. So just metacognition means thinking about your thinking. And we have to teach this to students or they won't get it.